welcome to Future Focus podcast. In this series, we talk to executives and learn from their experience. I have a special guest today, Harvey Guindi on the call. He is an IT executive at AAA. He brings 25 plus years of experience into IT and application management. His background is really varied. I will ask him to introduce himself. Welcome, Harvey, to the call.
Thank you, Jay. I'm Harvey Guindi. I'm glad to be here with everybody that's joining us on this podcast. As Jay mentioned, pretty broad experience. I've been in the IT field long enough that I often say that I've held just about every role that would report under a technology organization, from CIO to frontline support. My journey is probably not too different than many of you. Having gone to school and gotten a degree in computer science, as that was pretty much the only option in the 90s from a technology field of study. And the idea there was all about development, coding, and in some very antiquated technologies as it would be compared to today. And as you can imagine, I've made my career progression. Even having a developer job for a little less than a year, I was working for a company that wrote printer drivers, and I was in charge of doing bug fixes and updating code as they came in. As you can imagine, based on my role now as CIO and as executive and IT leader, the development path did not suit me very well. So I didn't really stay in that role very long. And certainly open systems became a big thing, and networking quickly got into that, setting up, for those of you that can remember, Novell networks, and then followed up by Windows NT, and obviously all of the different technology and evolution from there. But having held every single role from support guy, developer, IT technician, manager, director, multiple roles as CIO. But my background has primarily been in the biotech, CRO, and pharma space across those 25 plus years. As Jay mentioned, I've recently joined AAA as an IT executive that's really overseeing everything but the operations infrastructure and data warehousing. But everything else kind of falls under my realm. And so I'm excited to be with you guys and share a little bit about what I've learned over these years.
And I think one very logical question I have based on where you have come from. A lot of people want to reach where you are. So if you want to tell us some key highlights and transitions into your career, how did you transition or started with a programmer and reached the CIO level?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And so sometimes things happen and sometimes you make things happen. For me, I think it was a combination of both, right? So in my early part of my career, as you can imagine, IT professionals, especially those that were pretty savvy, and I didn't begin that part of my interest in college. It began probably, I think, 7th or 8th grade. I got my first PC, a Tandy 1000 SL, if anybody wants to get that excited. And figuring out how it works, figuring out how programs work, how to write programs, obviously playing games, that was the big part. I mean, I really envisioned myself being a creator of digital entertainment products. And obviously there was not a path for that going forward. Computer science was the closest thing that you could get into to get into that field. And so taking opportunities, I was able to get a job while at school for the Dean of School of Humanities at Cal State Fullerton, where I went, took care of the Social Science Research Center labs. They had computer labs at that time that they needed support. So it gave me an opportunity to do a lot of different things. And I think the main thing that you want is any kind of opportunity that lets you wear multiple hats. Never really try to put yourself in any kind of specialty. One of the things I used to say to my teams is, specialties for insects. We don't want to be ants or insects, the worker, this is the soldier. We want to be able to contribute broadly. And I think one of the things you want to look for is opportunities that let you do that. So in the early days, you didn't have very large IT departments. You had the IT guy. And I was the IT guy for a lot of mid-sized to smaller companies, set up servers, set up networks, applications, email communications. And so you get your hands into a lot of things and you really build that expertise. I think in today's world, you still have that opportunity. And if you seek it, and if it's not apparent while you're there, the biggest thing you can do is, as you're talking to your boss, is don't wait for him to assign you things. Take them from them. Be courageous enough to say, let me try that. Let me take it. What's the worst you can do? You learn something. You don't do it so well, but you learn something. And then you can try again later. And then, of course, there's other times where I've been given an opportunity, whether it's through promotion, through mergers, through buyouts, being recognized and moving on in different roles. That's what moved me from California to New Jersey. Biggest relocation I had. I was working for a small biotech that was bought by Purdue Pharma, and they wanted to consolidate all of their R&D discovery, part of their pipeline, into a new facility, and they built in Cranberry, New Jersey. So I was given an opportunity to either stay in California and be unemployed, or move to New Jersey and take a promotion. This was in 2001, so rough time in the economy and the world, as you can imagine, things that had took place. So I wasn't really sure about the future, and I was very naive to think that New Jersey can't be too different than California. So obviously that was very painful for me to go through, but I survived. And I say, if I can survive a relocation from Southern California to New Jersey, I can survive anything. That's an example of not being afraid and just moving forward. And that really opened my exposure to so many things, the broader pharma industry, the CRO industry, and it just kind of went from there.
That's such a nice learning. If I want to summarize it, I think first, being too specialist is not good for your growth. Second is, don't wait for your boss to tell you the work. Be proactive, take it on. Third thing, I think very important, and I experienced that in my career, don't be afraid about opportunity. Wherever they take you, go along with them. So thank you. I think the second question that most of the people are interested in, I have seen, is that COVID disrupted everything, right? It accelerated transformation, digital transformation for a lot of companies. And in your last job, which you were actually a CIO into a healthcare company, it caused a lot of disruption. I would like to ask you a question of how do you see COVID going forward and this new normal? What kind of digital transformation you see that will continue into the health sciences space? And how do you really see the patient-provider relationship shaping up?
That's a great question. Obviously, we all learned quite a bit and were influenced by what happened in COVID. And so I can give you a few examples. My time as CIO for multiple organizations is almost about 16 years. When you rise to that level, you have great exposure into what the business is doing, what they need, and how they're trying to grow, as well as where the technology is leading you. First and foremost, if we were to focus purely on COVID and what happened in digital transformation, the main thing that I have found as I dilute and distill IT leadership and technology is it's all about improving experiences. So if you really look at what is the experience that my end user is having, whether it's a customer, a physician, a patient, and whatever they're doing, whether they're trying to use a desktop application, they're trying to use an EMR, they're trying to schedule an appointment or something, walk through that, understand it, really invest yourself in terms of what is happening. Because in the end, you're not going to transform, you're not going to innovate, you're not going to make experiences better if you don't know what the journey is, what they're actually going through, and where some of the roadblocks are. That's one. Number two is to understand that people now are really measuring their experience not based on the industry competitors. So if they're going to H&L, which is the company I was at, they're not thinking, how is this comparing to when I went to Quest or LabCorp? They're thinking, how does this compare to my service appointment at Apple, my customer service experience with Amazon, my flight experience at Delta, or shopping at Costco or Amex, the ones that do it really well, that stand out in our minds. We can name them very quickly. That's what people are measuring us against. So when you ask the question, how did COVID change things? It changed our perspective because all the things that we just did in a healthcare setting went out the door. One of the things that healthcare was very well known for, which was dictating the rules in terms of how you get care and access. We set the appointment. The appointment isn't for the patient's convenience or benefit. It's for our benefit and convenience. We tell you where to go, when to go. We don't even tell you how much it's going to cost until after the fact. Really bad rules to run any kind of business. And of course, COVID just put it to a head and a lot of things changed. So a focus on digital channels and engagement was big, focus on convenience and concierge services, and a focus on doing real digital transformation. Using a lot of buzzwords doesn't mean anything, but if you break down what they're really trying to say, there's two parts. There's the digital and the transformation. So I'll give you an example. At our patient service centers, all of us have probably had this experience. You go to a doctor, you walk out with one of two things, prescription for some medication or a prescription to go get a blood work or a lab test. So you know what it's like. You walk in or you have to make an appointment in advance. Usually there's a check-in process. In the old days, it was a paper sheet, and all its purpose was for the person working the lab to know who came in what order and call you in that order. We changed that many years ago. It wasn't just pre-COVID. But we did that into a digital kiosk. So we're still capturing the same thing, your name, why you're here, and then obviously the system captures what time you came in. But then once you're called back, the system captures when you're called back. Once you're done, the system captures when you're done. And with just a little bit more of data, literally 3 values, more than what we had before in a digital format, we could totally change and revolutionize. And that's the part that most people don't get, the transforming part. Don't just take the same process and digitize it, but figure out how you're going to change because of that digitization. So by having those three data elements, we were able to really get rid of any kind of scheduling system, say, we're going to staff our centers based on what we're seeing demand. We know how long it takes on average for a person to be seen. We want to make the wait time 15 minutes or less. And so by having that data, we know how to staff appropriately. We know when there's a surge. So we added that from an event-driven architecture perspective. When we see 5, 6, or 7 people all signing in within a 2 or 3 minute window, we already know 2 people working that site are not going to maintain the 15-minute service guarantee. We immediately send a message to one of the mobile phlebotomists in the area, tell them to come to that site, immediately start taking other patients. Like when Costco sees lines are forming too big, they open more registers. And so that's the transformation that you have to be ready to make. A simpler way of putting it, technology and companies can do one of 2 things. They can adopt them or adapt. A lot of people are really good at adopting. They'll buy Salesforce, they'll buy Workday, they'll buy ServiceNow, you name it. They'll set it up exactly the way they were doing things before. And so therefore, they have not adapted. They haven't changed anything. They haven't transformed. They just use a different system. And that is where all your ROI goes out the window. All your ability to really improve that experience. Especially these days, these products are crowdsourced. They're really built on the best utilization and experience from thousands of customers. So it's to your benefit to actually change the way you're doing things and match what the product is trying to get you to do, because that's how you're going to get the most value and benefit.
I think you said a very big thing, and I myself learned it, and I'm going to use it with your permission, Harvey. And yes, COVID completely changed the rules of the game, and healthcare experienced the most. You did touch upon a couple of platforms. So one question that I wanted to ask you as a CIO is that there is always a debate between should I build it in-house myself as an application, or should I use a third-party platforms like AWS, you mentioned Salesforce, Azure, to build my application. What criteria have you typically used, or do you recommend other CIOs should use in terms to determine what's best for their business?
The build versus buy question is one of the things that we often are faced with. There's some underground rules for that. Very commodity-driven solutions, things that really do not differ very much from industry to industry. HRIS, ITSM, CRM, you name it, are things that you should really not consider building. You're not going to do a better job than Workday, Salesforce, ServiceNow, any of that. However, sometimes the barrier of entry is cost. Sometimes it can be very costly, depending on the size of an organization, to get into these platforms when you really only need a small piece. And that's a big question to answer. What is your scope? How much of this off-the-shelf solution are you ready and willing to use? If you're ready and willing to use and change a lot of what you're doing, you're going to get that money back. If you're really a change averse, you're not going to use it, you're not going to utilize all that scope, perhaps you need to look at an alternative. It could be build, it could be something a little bit cheaper. The other piece is, of course, have to take into account overall product and lifecycle management. If you build something, you own it. You have to maintain it. It's not a matter of the cost it takes to create it. It's the cost that is needed to maintain it and evolve it and integrate it. There are a lot of times people will build something because they are not capable of integrating an existing legacy product. One thing I would say is, look at all your options. I'll give you an example. In the healthcare space, we had a lab information system that was quite old. 40 years old is when it was first developed, and it had hardly changed over that time. Now, it does what it does very well in terms of managing the lab and the instruments and all that, but a lot of its user interface was through a terminal screen. Some of it was through a Windows 32 app. No browser, no business logic, no APIs, no service-oriented architecture, nothing. So if you needed to do something, you were doing it in an interactive screen with a human for the most part. And so someone might think, I need to replace that. I need to build my own, or I need to buy something else. You have options. RPA played a big option for us, robotic process automation. So when you have something that is a repetitive thing that a human is doing, or because you don't have an API or a backend to it, or you can't access the database, instead of thinking about replacing it, think about, how do I just get through that obstacle? We used RPA to basically create our own APIs, our RPA bots that would just sit there and do repetitive tasks through the UI as they were called, taking input, providing output, maybe not as fast as a true API, but certainly a lot more integrated and a lot more reliable than any human process could be. So that's the other piece, is determine your reasoning for why you're thinking about this particular solution. Is it something that is really out of date, no longer supported, and you need to make a decision? Or are you just trying to solve one piece, one limitation in an otherwise perfectly sufficient solution? Instead of throwing it all out, baby with the bathwater type of thing, maybe take an approach of thinking, what is the limiting piece and how do I get over that versus throwing it all out? If you think about those very simple kind of questions, you will have a better assessment in terms of, is this something I need to buy or build?
Okay, great. Great advice. I learned a lot today, Harvey, from you. Thank you for that. That brings me to my final question. See, a lot of executives and a lot of people in this industry want to grow to their maximum potential. Most of them want to get into the C-suite. You did tell your story in your first question about how you looked at it. In today's world, what would be your advice? Because the world has changed. 25 years back, things were very different. I started as a programmer, but today the world has changed. So what advice would you give to other CXOs in your basket, as well as people who are aspiring to get there?
Yeah, I think a great point, because that really is a transition. My time as a system engineer or a developer or whatever was quite more focused. The ability for me to be effective was because I was shielded from the noise. I didn't necessarily know everything that was going on. I didn't even know all the employees at the time, sometimes in the company. But as you move up the chain, as you take on more responsibility from an executive, a couple of things I would say is you have to know who your business owners are, and you have to communicate with them, and you have to have good, normal, and regular dialogue with them, because they may be coming at you with a laundry list and a beat down of all the things they hate, all the things that are wrong. There is truth in those conversations. As painful as they might be, you have to be very open and willing to hear it out and not go into any kind of defensive mode. So that's one thing. Lots of things that I've learned, lots of things that I was able to change, lots of initiatives I was able to lead is just by listening and seeing. The other is understand the process. As a technologist, your role isn't to know the roadmaps and the benefits and features and specs of technology, whether it's forms or languages or infrastructure or even cloud stuff. You have to be aware of that for sure. But you have partners, leverage them, but manage them appropriately. Give them what success criteria you really need, understand the scope, let them be the experts, challenge them. If they're not what I call interrogating you, if they're not asking you lots and lots of questions to understand your business, they're probably not in it very well. They're not the right partner. Don't try to learn everything. Use your partners more effectively. What you do want to use your time in is the thing that your partners can do, that relationship within the business, knowing the customers and knowing that process. You have to spend time knowing how the business functions and how it runs. Because in the end, like I said, your job is to utilize, implement, and leverage technology to improve the business. And if you think about it from an experience perspective, you're going to improve the business. It could be as simple as being the mitigation between cybersecurity requirements and end user productivity. As a CIO, you're going to have cybersecurity requirements that have to be implemented, a lot of controls and a lot of things. The best cybersecurity is the one where the user can't access their stuff anymore. So, right? So,
lock down everything.
That's the most secure system, right? No one can access it, but nobody's going to get anything done. Of course, you give everybody all the power and all of the freedom, trouble could happen. You've got a vulnerability and exposure. So when you think about it from experience, you have to figure out what is the middle ground? How do I balance this and that? Because when you think about it, you say, you don't have to have machines that are fast. They have to access things quickly. They have to have information available to them. If they have to jump through many hoops, if they have to go through multiple layers, if you add security to the point, it's burdensome and difficult. They're either not going to be productive or they'll find ways around it. So you have to make things easy. I'll give you one simple example, passwords. No, everybody hates them. Nobody wants them. Ultimately, we all want to get to a passwordless world where you're just using your biometric or something that you just have or know. The middle ground we did was we implemented a enterprise password enforcement policy that was a lot more robust, that didn't just dictate how many characters and what kind of letters and numbers there had to be, but really took advantage of some logic in terms of don't use stupid passwords like winter 2023. That would meet the criteria. It would be long enough, it would have a capital, it would have numbers, but it would be a horrible password. So we had tools that would catch that. It would catch simple changes using zeros instead of O's and things that are, again, very easily guessable. So we've made people be able to finally have good, secure passwords. In return, what did we do? We made the password policy reset from 90 days to 6 months. And then after we saw that everything was going good, we made it
So
even
good.
a year. To find that balance of productivity, put a little bit more burden and manage it, but you have to find a way that it actually yields transformation, something that is improved. So that's what I mean about knowing and being empathetic and being in the trenches. The last thing, as an executive in any organization, you're an owner. You have to think of yourself as an owner. You have to think of yourself of how you're going to grow the business. You have to think of how you can use your role and your knowledge to contribute and grow it. For example, for me, again, I'll use my last place because I was there longest. I've only been at AAA for 6 months, is I saw an opportunity to provide direct-to-consumer testing. Didn't exist at the time. People weren't really doing it. Read through the laws, talked to my compliance people, the governance folks, said, if we do it within these constraints, I can create an e-commerce site where somebody who just doesn't want to go to a doctor first, doesn't want to do a copay, doesn't want to go through the process, maybe wants it private. There's lots of marketing reasons why you'd want to do it. They might want to take a drug test, an SCT, a regular cholesterol test. Maybe their insurance only covers them once a year and they want to be able to do it out of pocket a little bit faster or more often. Huge opportunity market. No one in the business thought of it. Nobody thought it would make sense or work. They gave it to me and said, if it fails, it's on you. And again, going back to that first thing, don't be afraid. Made a small team, move forward. Now it brings in about $1.5 million of extra revenue that didn't exist before. And it's using capacity that was already there. It didn't really add any more expense to the business other than some supplies and consumables. So that's the last piece. If you're going to be really effective, you got to find a way within your organization sometimes to do that Uber Airbnb model. Look at where there's an unserved demand and excess capacity and be that thing in the middle that connects the two. When you think of things that way, you will find many opportunities where there's an unserved need and there's some capacity here. Hey, I don't have to own anything. I can just be in the middle and make the money and diversify my business or grow it or create opportunities for people, etc.
That is such a nice advice. Thank you. One thing definitely struck my attention, and now I know why we were successful in your last company where we were your partners, is because you allow the partners to be the experts. Many companies I see, they hire the vendors for their expertise, but then they start dictating what to do. And I think a great perspective. Thank you for that. It was really nice talking to you, Harvey. Any last words before we close the podcast?
I think it's an exciting time and certainly one where you don't know where things are going to lead you. So trust your instinct. Sometimes the most logical answer isn't the right one. I'll give you one from my experience in the mid-90s. I had 2 offers. One was with a company that was closer to my home, offering me more money and a slightly higher position. Another one that was farther away, less money, and a slightly lower position. My gut, my spiritual side said, go with the one that doesn't seem logical at all. And it didn't make sense, but I did. And I'll tell you, the one that I didn't take was a company called Thomas Brothers Maps. Huge in the 90s. They made paper maps. Can you imagine the kind of potential future that was there? Not very much. I've made a ton of money for a few more years. As soon as GPS and the internet came about, they don't really exist anymore. The other one was in the biotech space that I don't know anything about, but it ultimately led my career into biotech, pharma, CRO, and all the experiences that I got. So don't always think that the logical answer is the right one.
Thank you. Thank you for these last words. It was nice to have you on the podcast, Harvey. I look forward to talking and working with you. Thank you and have a nice day.
Have a great day, Jay. Thank you.